Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre, LaRouche Independent Candidate for U.S. Senate from New York, and today is August 25th. It is the end of the BRICS summit in South Africa. There is an enormous amount happening in the world. I think the most important thing to note is that we are at the end of the transatlantic liberal financial system, just as Lyndon and Helga Zepp-LaRouche warned would occur when people were rejoicing over the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the communist bloc in the East. They warned that the collapse of the British free trade system, which would be much larger and much farther ranging. So I also would like to say that I have recently been traveling through the state of New York, and I had the opportunity earlier today to go to a museum on the Erie Canal. And one of the things that was reported in the museum is that the city of Syracuse, New York, saw a 40-fold increase in its population in 10 years after the completion of the canal. So imagine that, the power of transportation corridors to make it possible to sustain many more people at a much higher standard of living, because you're improving commerce, but also the circulation of profound ideas. And from that standpoint, what has been unleashed at this BRICS summit, starting really in 2014 with the announcement of the creation of a BRICS development bank, which echoes what Lyndon LaRouche proposed in 1976, his International Development Bank. And so to share with you what has been going on at this summit, which the Western media does not want anyone to know, and I mean both the US and Helga Zepp-LaRouche has reported from Western Europe as well, there is next to no coverage. This is, it's only 45 nations representing, I don't know, 5 or 6 billion people, obviously not significant. So at any rate, with that, I will turn things over to Stuart Battle, who is newly on the editorial board of LaRouche's journal Executive Intelligence Review, and who has been covering this conference in recent days. So Stuart, thanks very much for joining me, and welcome.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Diane. Hi, everybody. Um, yeah, so there's a lot to say. I'm going to try to just give a somewhat of a snapshot picture, but this summit really was historic. I mean, obviously the thing that, if you have heard anything, which there was coverage of in some of the Western media, but it was negative, if anything. It was, oh, it's just desperate moves by Putin and Xi Jinping to exert their autocratic influence. And the biggest one was, it's never going to hold together because there's too many divisions and there's no cohesion, there's no common interest amongst the different nations, which is a laughable thing to talk about. But anyways, I'll come back to that in a minute. So the thing that you may have heard was that it's went from 5 members to now 11 members, and that includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. So I'll show a picture just to give a sense of the magnitude of this. So, it's a serious powerhouse. Like Diane said, I didn't add up the number, but yeah, it's over half the population of the world now, I believe. And with the membership of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, this is getting close to 50% of the world's oil production. It's more than half of the top 10 oil producing nations. Okay, so anyways, I just wanted to show this and give a sense of the overall transformation that took place. There was apparently over 40 countries which attended. Of course, it took place in South Africa, which was less than a month after this major summit in St. Petersburg, Russia, the Russia-Africa summit, where many heads of state and governments attended from Africa to Russia. And it was similar in South Africa at the BRICS, where all the heads of state from every country in Africa was also invited. And so anyways, there's a lot that one could say about the situation. But what I would like to do, let me show actually a couple more pictures just to, I think they're fun. This was yesterday. This was the broader summit with the other 40 heads of state, including Africa. It was a big push on the global south, the developing world. You can see the 5 desks of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then very importantly, kind of in the middle towards the back, by herself is Dilma Rousseff, who is the new president of the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank. So, anyways, so that's just a kind of a flavor of that. Now, what I'd like to talk about briefly is I had gone back earlier and I'd started looking at this question of the BRICS expansion. This, people don't know, this was the first time since 2010 that the BRICS increased its membership. It basically started in 2009 with Brazil, Russia, India, China. 1 year later, they added South Africa, and then that was 13 years ago, and there was no increase in membership until yesterday, and there was 6 new members added. So, I was asking the question, well, when did this start? What was leading up to this? And I think it's very interesting. So what happened was at the last year's BRICS summit, which was it was sometime in the earlier midsummer of 2022, I forget. Anyways, it was raised, it might have been June, but it was kind of loosely discussed. It was kind of, just mentioned that we might be considering increasing the membership, inviting new members to join. So Argentina was the first one who formally filed an application to become a member of the BRICS in mid-June last year. Within 2 weeks, there was a second application by Iran. Then within a couple weeks after that, by mid-July, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt had also applied to join. So within a month or so, there was 5 applications. Then by August, that number had jumped to 13. So you can start to see what was happening. By the spring 2023, that number had jumped up to 19. By the end of May, the mention, sometimes they kind of lost track. You just get these census and news reports. Oh, there's this many now interested in joining. It was over 30. And then, of course, by the time that the summit started this week, there was over 40 that were supposedly interested in joining. Anyway, so this all happened, of course, since I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but this happened, of course, since the Russia special operation into Ukraine, the massive sanctions by the West, the attempt to polarize the world around the autocrats versus the Democrats, which was the Biden, President Biden summit of separating those 2 poles in the world. And I think this tells you something about the absolutely explosive response which has occurred in the world amongst the attempts to polarize and cajole, most of the world into the Western camp against countries like Russia and China. Anyway, so just to say that. Now, I want to talk about the case of Argentina, which was, of course, accepted yesterday as a member, was the first applicant. And what is interesting, that people might have heard, is that Argentina is in the complete, uh, has been in a terrible, terrible fight over their economy. They have interest rates over, or rates of inflation, I should say, over 100%. Their currency has been falling through the floor for the recent months, and very horrific situation economically. They had accepted a major loan. I want to say 2018 or 2019 from the former Argentine government from the IMF, which is a completely usurious and imperial type of lending institution that does not invest in anything beyond rolling over debt and paying off financial, stockholders and bondholders, basically. So, anyways, Argentina was in this crisis. They've been in a series of negotiations with the IMF and the White House actually to write down their stock, or to write down their debt. What happened was very clearly a response to this crime, this genocidal crime being done against Argentina, to basically extract any wealth out of them by these international lending institutions. And you see how they responded with reaching out to the BRICS. So when there was an interview given to Argentina's ambassador to China last summer, he said, yes, we are interested in joining the BRICS because it's a cooperation mechanism composed entirely of emerging economies. There are no strings attached, and all cooperation is mutually beneficial. I'm going to kind of zip through a few things. It was interesting. Argentina and Egypt were in serious discussions over the last 3 months. Egypt and Argentina are the two largest debtors to the IMF in the world, which tells you something, that both of those joined the BRICS yesterday. Now listen to what the Argentine finance minister said, described how being in the IMF is like. This is Sergio Massa. He said at a conference on June 27th of this year. He said, so whatever the next president, he must have an obsession that no matter who he is, he must export. He has to have an export program and gather all the dollars Argentina needs to pay off the fund and get it out of Argentina again, so that it never comes back. By the fund, he means the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. This is part of the discussion that middle-income countries are having. What does it mean to go to the fund, he asked? It means accepting goals, commitments, and obligations in terms of an economic program to give up part of your autonomy and tie you to an economic program which defines your country's ability to repay the debt. That's what it means to go to the fund. So in other words, it's a complete putting a noose around your neck, or as the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, said, it's like putting a knife to your throat. And that is clearly what is kind of unfolding in a reaction against it from the BRICS and like-minded countries. Let me do this, because I think I want to summarize so we can have a discussion. How are we doing on time, Diane?
Okay, we have about 10 more minutes or so.
Okay.
That's fine.
Let me just say a couple of things, and then I'll wrap up, and then we can go from there. So what I just wanted to compare it to is Dilma Rousseff, who is the president of the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, who very explicitly in her speech, both at the BRICS summit this week and also repeatedly over the last couple of months, she has elaborated that we will have no onerous conditionalities in our loans to the developing world. And she's just made the point that let's see if I can find the quote. She said that for developing countries and emerging economies, The question is about overcoming the condition of mere suppliers of commodities, considering the immense wealth we have in rare earths and ores. The question really is making clear on the promise to develop. So getting the financing necessary to transition into a modern, productive nation, which is, of course, the opposite of what the financial dictatorship of Wall Street and London and the IMF have done, which is to get you in a debt cycle that never actually adds to your capability to produce, to take your raw materials, to take any resources and develop the capacity to grow your nation physically, only to turn it into a money cycle where you export the raw materials and then have debt laden on the other side. Anyway, so I think there's a lot to say about this, but the real revolution is the fact that you have this discussion taking place not just behind the scenes, not just in secret, but that you have real steps being put on the table and being moved on, which are revolutionizing the ability not just for the BRICS countries to get out of poverty and get out of this financial straitjacket that has been a relic of colonialism for hundreds of years, but actually a alternative system of serious national and international credit for large-scale economic development. So anyways, I think I'll kind of end there, but it's a very exciting situation. And yeah, go ahead.
Great. No, I think this is wonderful. It was Argentina and which other nation? Egypt or Ethiopia?
Egypt. Ethiopia
Egypt.
also joined, but
Right, that had the greatest debt to the International Monetary Fund.
Egypt, yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's very important because, of course, we know from decades ago the IMF would then use that indebtedness as a battering ram to say, well, you have to sell off your port, you have to shut down your water treatment, you have to do X, Y, and Z in order for us to not, totally downgrade you or whatever. So I hope that Americans can see that this is possible now because of the fight waged by the brave colonists or anti-colonists, the people in the what became the United States 250 plus years ago, going all the way back to 1620 and really earlier, where it was clear that you could not have a system that allowed for individual human beings to develop their God-given potential under the oligarchical caste system of Europe. You had to go to a new world to establish the principles of self-government, even though people had been arguing for that going back to Nicholas of Cusa in the 1400s. So Sukarno, president of Indonesia, who spoke in the 1955 Bandung conference, made the point that the United States had had the very first successful anti-colonial revolution. So the most natural thing in the world for Americans would be to rejoice that other nations are throwing off the shackles of oppression by the billionaires, but instead, because of this brainwashing we've been having against Russia, against China in particular, which is really partnering with many, many nations for building modern infrastructure. I've seen you tell people, hey, now they have, and you can imagine, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the boogeymen are joining the Alliance for Economic Development. How do you propose that we end the era of perpetual war? How do you get stability? Do you think a young person would rather be a suicide bomber than a nuclear engineer, given the choice? And we have to create those conditions. So I know you've been reading this. What is your sense of it? And why do you think the West is so hot to prevent anyone from knowing about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I mean, I think the fact that really everyone is missing is that the the nations of the world who were not able to escape from the, colonialism, that were not actually able to develop over the last 100 years or 200 years. This was a reality that had to be dealt with sooner or later. I mean, it really is a sense of slavery. It's like a certain global slavery which was imposed on the entire continent of Africa, much of Asia, the entirety of Central and South America, who were never given the opportunity to break free of endemic poverty. And when they tried to, either there was leaders who were assassinated, there was financial warfare, sanctions, there was massive capital flight. I mean, this is a whole story about the offshore tax havens and how the circles in Wall Street in London engineered financial warfare to go against any nation which tried to buck the system. Um, so yeah, I mean that's just what's happening. It's like it really is it's and it would be wrong to think that it's an anti-American thing, which I think is your point. Americans should be proud because there's an inspiration which used to exist from these countries. When you mentioned the Bandung conference, the some of the speeches were inspired and explicitly were quoting the American Revolution as their inspiration. So we should be proud of this, and the idea that it's anti-American to want to break from the IMF and break from the World Bank and break from NATO and all these things um, is just it's so ludicrous. It's really something that will not stand the test of time, because this is really you know, I think Xi Jinping said, if I remember right, in one of his speeches at the BRICS summit, he had some old Chinese story, or whatever, that he said even the largest mountain can't stop a flowing river. And it was just such a nice metaphor in terms of what you're seeing right now, that does give a sense of what the task is for the world right now to actually live up to.
So I should just also mention, of course, that while the summit was going on, India had its first successful soft landing on the moon. For great joy in India, and Modi, of course, was watching it from South Africa, waving the Indian flag back and forth. It was really delightful to watch. Unfortunately, Russia had a failure of their attempted landing. They haven't been there in over 50 years, so it's really not surprising. It's fiendishly difficult to try and land heavy, delicate objects gently on the moon, even though its gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth. But Modi said this is really a victory for mankind, and of course what they're exploring is ice, water, whether you have enough water on the South Pole to be able to sustain human activity. And the entire moon, this Chandrayaan-3 only cost $74 million, which might also be a lesson. That's less than it cost in the US to produce the movie Gravity. And I would say it's also probably less than the salaries combined of 75 pro football players in the United States. So I think we should consider what we're spending our money on, and it's not even 1% of what we've sent to Ukraine for a proxy war with Russia, which could lead to the annihilation of all of us. But you can be sure that the children of India are fantastically inspired by this success, and you probably have about, I don't know, 100 million new uh, engineers in the future because of this mission and the impact it had on the children of India. And we need to be doing the same thing in the United States. So we have to wrap up. But if you have any closing thoughts or parting words you'd like to share, please go ahead.
Um, No, I think that's well put. I mean, I think that the U.S. has so much to offer in terms of the technological capability and the 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 idea of what it means to be a nation of of actual free people in a republic. If we can remember what it means to be a free nation, but I think we have a tremendous amount to offer, and we should do it in the spirit of making the world a better place. And I think it'll be a wonderful future if we do that.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to encourage everyone to please go to SareForSenate.com and donate to the campaign. Also, please put September 9th on your calendar. Saturday, September 9th will be a major international Schiller Institute conference where we will be working to advance this process. And hopefully by then, more people in the United States will have become aware of it, and we may see some changes here in the direction so urgently needed. So thank you again, Stuart, for joining us. Thank you everyone for watching, and with any luck, I will hope to be seeing you again next week.